Two boys shared the same cell, roughly, for years. The same captors, the same uncertain mornings, never knowing if today was the day their father's promises finally failed, and someone decided they were no longer useful, alive. One of those boys grew up to build a forest out of 20,000 bodies, and the world would eventually call him Dracula. The other boy grew up to rule the same country his brother once ruled, placed on that throne by the very empire that had held them both captive. This channel has already told you about the first boy extensively. It has barely told you anything about the second. His name was Radu. History remembers him, when it remembers him at all, as Frumos, Radu the Handsome. And his story is, in its own quiet way, just as strange as his brother's. Maybe stranger, because almost nobody has bothered to actually tell it. Same childhood, same captivity, same trauma as far as anyone can tell. And somehow, two men who could not have ended up more different from each other. This is the documented history of Radu Frumos, dramatized in the places where two brothers' private relationship can only be reasonably reconstructed, not verified. And the uncomfortable question underneath it: what actually determines which brother becomes the legend and which one gets erased? This channel has already covered how Vlad and his younger brother Radu ended up as Ottoman hostages in 1442, sent by their father to secure peace with the Sultan, a common political tool of the era. What this channel hasn't spent much time on is Radu himself during those years. Vlad was around 11. Radu was younger still. Most historians place him at 7 or 8 when the two brothers arrived at the Ottoman court together. They were educated together by most accounts: language, philosophy, horsemanship, the kind of instruction reserved for hostages valuable enough to potentially be useful later, rather than simply disposable. And by nearly every surviving account, the two boys reacted to that captivity in almost opposite ways, practically from the start. This channel has already told you Vlad was defiant, difficult, according to some accounts, punished for his stubbornness. Radu, by contrast, adapted. Multiple sources describe him settling into Ottoman court life with a comfort his older brother never once showed. Learning the language fluently, embracing customs Vlad apparently resisted, building genuine relationships within a court that held both boys prisoner. It would be easy, from a modern vantage point, to read this as simple betrayal. Radu choosing comfort over loyalty to his family, his faith, his homeland. But sit with the actual position of an 8-year-old for a moment, taken from everything familiar, watching his older brother's constant defiance produce nothing but punishment and tension. Two children, the same age gap most siblings have, facing the exact same impossible situation. One decided resistance was the only survivable posture. The other decided the opposite. Neither was wrong, exactly. They were just very young and very alone, and they reached for different kinds of safety. Whatever affection existed between them as small children, and there's no real reason to assume there wasn't any, that divergence, formed in captivity before either of them was even a teenager, would eventually put them on opposite sides of a war. The brothers' paths formally split when Vlad, as this channel's earlier episodes have covered, returned to Wallachia, first for his brief 60-day reign in 1448, and later for good in 1456. Radu stayed behind, not as a prisoner in the harshest sense anymore. By his late teens and 20s, Radu had become something closer to a trusted member of the Ottoman court's broader political apparatus. Favored, useful, positioned deliberately as an alternative to his increasingly unmanageable older brother. This channel's first episode already told the story of 1462, Vlad's scorched earth campaign, the Forest of Stakes, the night raid on Mehmet's own camp. What that episode didn't dwell on is what was happening on the other side of that campaign, politically. While Vlad fought the Ottoman invasion directly, Radu was already positioned, waiting, as the alternative Wallachia's boyars could turn to instead. Imagine being one of those boyars for a moment. Your prince is out there somewhere, building forests of impaled bodies, making enemies of the largest empire in the region through sheer terrifying force of will. And there's a second option right there, patient and diplomatically fluent, backed by the exact empire your prince is currently at war with. It's not a difficult calculation from a pure survival standpoint. It's just an unbearable one if you're the two brothers actually living inside it. Because somewhere in 1462, as Vlad's campaign began to falter, his allies withdrawing, his resources thinning, the same pattern this channel has now documented across nearly his entire life, Radu crossed back into Wallachia. Not as a hostage anymore, as a rival claimant with Ottoman military backing, moving toward the same throne his brother currently held. Two brothers, raised in the exact same cell, converging again, this time from opposite directions toward the same chair.
What happened next is documented, if underexplored. As Vlad's position collapsed in the later stages of the 1462 campaign, Radu's claim gained real traction, and eventually, Wallachia's throne passed from one brother to the other. Consider the strangeness of that transition for the boyars living through it. The same nobility this channel has already shown betraying Vlad's father, surviving Vlad's Easter reckoning, rebuilding Panari under forced labor, now had to decide again which brother's rule gave them the best chance of keeping their heads, their land, and their families intact. Many chose Radu, not necessarily out of any particular love for him, simply because a ruler backed by the dominant regional empire, willing to maintain peace rather than provoke it, looked considerably safer than continuing to back a brother who'd already proven he'd burn towns and impale merchants over considerably smaller provocations. Radu's reign, once established, was by most accounts markedly different in character from his brother's. Less overt terror, more accommodation with Ottoman interests. A ruler who, whatever else can be said about him, didn't leave behind forests of stakes or towns burned to the ground. Some historians read this as evidence that Radu was, in a straightforward sense, simply the more moderate, more pragmatic brother, perhaps even, by conventional measures of a ruler's success, more effective at actually keeping Wallachia stable and intact during his reign. And yet almost nobody remembers his name. History has an odd relationship with moderation. It rarely builds legends out of rulers who simply kept things stable and didn't burn anything down. Vlad, the brother who terrified an empire into retreat, got a name that survived 5 centuries and became a global icon, however distorted. Radu, the brother who arguably governed more successfully by nearly every conventional measure, got almost nothing. A footnote in his own brother's story.
Radu ruled Wallachia, with periods of instability and at least one further challenge to his throne, for roughly a decade, considerably longer than Vlad's combined total time on that same throne across all 3 of his reigns. He died in 1475, relatively young, with some accounts suggesting illness as the cause, though consistent with how thin the documentation gets around Radu specifically, even the circumstances of his death aren't recorded with the same care historians have devoted to his brothers. Think about that asymmetry for a moment, because it's the actual emotional core of this entire episode. Vlad's death, barely a year after Radu's, as this channel's earlier episodes have already covered, spawned centuries of theories, cold case investigations, tomb discoveries, propaganda pamphlets, and eventually a global horror icon. Radu's death barely warranted a clear historical record of how it happened. One brother became myth. The other brother, who arguably ruled longer, arguably governed with more conventional success, and arguably suffered through the exact same childhood trauma that shaped both of them, simply faded. There's no real mystery in why, if you're honest about how history and legend actually work. Terror is memorable. Moderation rarely is. Vlad gave the world forests of stakes and propaganda pamphlets and a mythology so vivid it eventually produced Dracula. Radu gave the world a decade of comparative peace, and comparative peace doesn't generate 5 centuries of retelling. But knowing why it happened doesn't make it feel any less like an injustice, sitting here, telling his story for what may be one of the only times it's been told this directly in English. So here's what this episode actually leaves you with. And it's a different kind of ending than most of this channel's stories. 2 boys shared a childhood of captivity that this channel has now examined from multiple angles. Vlad's version extensively across 9 previous episodes. Radu's version for the first time right here. They reacted to identical trauma in nearly opposite ways, and both reactions were, in their own terms, a kind of survival. One brother's survival strategy made him remembered as a monster. The other brother's survival strategy made him almost entirely forgotten. Neither outcome particularly reflects which brother was the better person, or even the better ruler by any measure historians can actually verify. It mostly reflects which kind of story humans have always found more worth retelling. And 5 centuries later, that's still terror, nearly every time, over quiet competence. Somewhere, in an unmarked or barely documented grave, a man who once shared a cell with the most infamous ruler in Romanian history is still waiting for someone to say his name as clearly as his brother's. This episode is, in its own small way, an attempt at that. Every week, this channel goes back into the true history behind the legend the world calls Dracula. The forest that made an empire retreat. The grave still debated centuries later. The feast that became a reckoning. The ally who manufactured a monster. The raid that gave that monster its face. The river that may have taken someone he couldn't save. The exile years with a future saint. The final war. The cold case that's still open. The monk whose testimony started it all. And now, the brother who chose the other side and paid for it with being almost entirely forgotten. Subscribe if you think every brother in this story deserves to have his name said out loud, not just the one who became a legend. We'll see you in the next Chronicle.